Three true horror stories happened in The Conjuring, The Shining, and the Amityville houses. Welcome back to Horror Vault Channel. Today, I am going to tell you three true horror stories that have occurred in the famous houses depicted in the three famous horror movies, namely The Conjuring, The Shining, and the Amityville Horror. If you like these stories and want to watch our new upcoming stories, then do subscribe to Horror Vault. So, without further delay, let us delve deep into these stories. Story 1. The Conjuring in the Rhode Island House. In the 1970s, Roger and Carolyn Perrone, along with their 5 daughters, moved into a 300-year-old farmhouse in Harrisville, Rhode Island. Initially, the house seemed idyllic with its rustic charm and spacious rooms. However, it didn't take long for the family to realize that they were not alone. The house was rumored to have been the home of Bathsheba Sherman, a woman accused of witchcraft in the 19th century. Bathsheba's malevolent spirit was said to haunt the property. At first, the paranormal activity was subtle and even benign. The Perrone children claimed that unseen entities would tuck them into bed at night and kiss their foreheads. One of the spirits carried a pleasant scent of flowers and fruit. But as time passed, the atmosphere in the house darkened. The once friendly spirits turned hostile, with strange noises echoing through the halls and objects moving on their own. Dark silhouettes were seen lurking in doorways, and Carolyn began experiencing physical attacks. Bruises and scratches appeared on her body without explanation. Desperate for help, the parents reached out to renowned paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens conducted a series of investigations in the house, uncovering its sinister history. They believed that Bathsheba's spirit was tormenting the family, along with other trapped souls. Despite their efforts to cleanse the home, the parents eventually fled, unable to endure the escalating terror. The house remains infamous for its haunting legacy. Visitors today report seeing shadowy figures and feeling an oppressive presence. Although it boasts 3 bedrooms, a cozy fireplace, and other amenities, its dark reputation makes it difficult to sell. Horror story happened in the house of Harrisville. The story begins with Roger Perrone sitting by the fireplace late one evening in 1972. The crackling fire cast flickering shadows on the walls of their Rhode Island farmhouse as his wife Carolyn prepared tea in the kitchen. Their daughters were already asleep upstairs, or so they thought. A soft giggle echoed from one of the bedrooms. Roger frowned. It was far too late for playtime. He climbed the creaky stairs and peeked into his daughter's room, but found them sound asleep. The giggle came again, this time from behind him. He spun around but saw only darkness. Downstairs, Carolyn felt a chill as she poured tea into 2 mugs. She glanced at the window above the sink and froze. A pale face stared back at her from outside, the face of a woman with hollow eyes and cracked lips. Carolyn screamed, dropping the mug as Roger rushed down. "What happened?" he asked breathlessly. Carolyn pointed at the window, but it was empty now. "There was someone there," she whispered. That night marked the beginning of their nightmare. Over the next few weeks, strange occurrences became routine. The children spoke of an invisible friend who smelled like flowers and tucked them in at night. At first, Carolyn dismissed these stories as childhood imagination until she began waking up with unexplained bruises on her arms. One evening, while cleaning out an old chest in the attic, Carolyn found a dusty photograph of a woman dressed in 19th century clothing. Scribbled on the back was a name, Bathsheba. That night, she dreamed of being strangled by an unseen force, while a woman's voice hissed accusations of betrayal. The following day, Roger returned home to find Carolyn standing motionless in front of a mirror in their bedroom. Her reflection didn't match her movements. It smiled when she did not. "Carolyn," he shouted, shaking her out of her trance. "It's her," Carolyn whispered hoarsely. "She doesn't want us here." The family sought help from Ed and Lorraine Warren after one particularly violent incident where furniture flew across the room during dinner. Lorraine immediately sensed Bathsheba's presence upon entering the house. "She's claimed this land," Lorraine said gravely after conducting a seance in which she communicated with Bathsheba's spirit. She sees you as intruders. During one chilling seance session, Carolyn became possessed by Bathsheba's spirit. Her voice deepened unnaturally as she screamed accusations at Roger and their children before collapsing unconscious. The Warrens attempted an exorcism but warned that Bathsheba's hold on the house might never be fully broken. One stormy night months later, while packing their belongings to leave for good, Roger heard footsteps upstairs even though everyone was downstairs with him. Grabbing a flashlight, he ascended cautiously. In one of the bedrooms stood a shadowy figure, a woman with hollow eyes who whispered his name, Roger. Terrified yet unable to move, he watched as she raised her hand toward him before vanishing into thin air. The parents left that very night and never returned. Years later, visitors to the abandoned farmhouse still report hearing whispers in empty rooms and catching glimpses of shadowy figures watching them from doorways. Bathsheba's legacy lives on. Story 2. The Amityville Horror. The infamous house at 112 Ocean Avenue in Amityville, New York, has become a symbol of terror. Built in 1960, the three-story home initially seemed like a dream residence. However, its history turned it into one of America's most haunted locations. In 1974, Ronald DeFeo Jr. murdered his parents and 4 siblings in the house, claiming he was driven to kill by mysterious voices. The tragedy left a dark stain on the property. A year later, the Lutz family moved in but fled after just 28 days, reporting terrifying paranormal phenomena. Strange noises, foul odors, green slime oozing from walls, and ghostly apparitions. Their young daughter claimed to have befriended an invisible girl named Jody. The house was sold multiple times over the years, but retained its sinister reputation. Voices in the dark. The story begins on a cold November night in 1974. Ronald DeFeo Jr., known as Butch to his family, sat alone in his room at 112 Ocean Avenue. The house was eerily silent except for the faint creak of floorboards settling under the weight of time. Butch stared at the walls, his mind racing with thoughts he couldn't control. "Do it," a voice whispered from the shadows. "They're watching you." Butch turned sharply, but no one was there. He clutched his head as the whispers grew louder, overlapping and echoing until they became unbearable. The night of terror. At 3:15 a.m., Butch rose from his bed as though compelled by an unseen force. He retrieved a rifle from the basement and moved through the house methodically. His parents were asleep in their bedroom when he pulled the trigger, once for each of them. Then he moved to his siblings' rooms, silencing them one by one. By dawn, 6 bodies lay lifeless in their beds. Butch sat on the couch in the living room, staring blankly at the wall as police sirens wailed in the distance. 1 year later, the Lutz family moves in. George and Kathy Lutz stood outside their new home with their 3 children and dog Harry. The house was everything they had dreamed of. Spacious, charming, and affordable due to its grim history. "This is a fresh start," George said as he carried boxes into the foyer. But from their first night in the house, strange things began to happen. Day 3, the cold spot. Kathy woke up shivering despite the heater running at full blast. She walked into the hallway and felt an icy chill near her daughter Missy's room. Inside, Missy sat on her bed talking to someone who wasn't there. "Who are you talking to?" Kathy asked gently. "Jody," Missy replied with a smile. "She's my friend." Kathy's stomach tightened as she glanced around the empty room. Day 10, the slime. George was working late in his study when he heard a faint dripping sound. He followed it to the kitchen and froze. Thick green slime was oozing from the walls and pooling on the floor. "What is this?" he muttered, touching it cautiously. It smelled foul, like rotting meat. That night, George woke up at exactly 3:15 a.m., drenched in sweat. He felt an overwhelming urge to go to the boathouse, but found nothing unusual there, just an oppressive sense of being watched. Day 20. The voices. The whispers began softly at first, indistinct murmurs that could be mistaken for wind or distant traffic. But soon they grew louder and more distinct. "Get out! They hissed repeatedly. George became increasingly irritable and withdrawn. He spent hours chopping wood for no reason and snapping at Kathy over trivial matters. "You're not yourself," she said tearfully one evening as he glared at her with bloodshot eyes. "This house is changing you." Day 25, the Red Room. While exploring the basement, George discovered a hidden door behind a shelf. Inside was a small red-painted room that reeked of decay. The dog growled and barked furiously at it, but refused to enter. Missy later told her parents that Jody lived in that room and didn't want anyone else going inside. The final night. On their last night in the house, chaos erupted. Doors slammed shut on their own while unseen forces pounded on walls and windows. Kathy woke up screaming after dreaming that George had killed her and their children with an axe. George woke up again at 3:15 a.m., this time hearing guttural voices chanting from below. He grabbed his rifle and descended into the basement, where he found himself face to face with a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. "Leave!" It roared as George stumbled backward up the stairs. The family fled that night without taking any of their belongings. The Lutz family never returned to 112 Ocean Avenue. They claimed their experiences were real, but refused to elaborate further after selling their story to author Jay Anson for his book The Amityville Horror, 1977. To this day, visitors report strange occurrences near the house. Faint whispers carried on cold winds and glimpses of shadowy figures in its windows. Whatever malevolent force resides there remains dormant, waiting for its next victims. Story 3. The Shining in the Overlook Hotel. In 1974, Stephen King and his wife Tabitha checked into the Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado. The hotel was nearly empty as it prepared to close for the winter season. That night, Stephen wandered through the eerie, deserted halls, visited the bar where a bartender named Grady served him drinks, and dreamed of his young son running through the corridors, chased by a fire hose. These experiences inspired The Shining, a novel that would become one of King's most iconic works. The Overlook Hotel in the story is a fictionalized version of the Stanley Hotel, but its haunting atmosphere and sinister history are deeply rooted in King's real-life stay. The Overlook Hotel is portrayed as a grand but isolated resort in the Colorado Rockies. Jack Torrance, an aspiring writer and recovering alcoholic, takes a job as its winter caretaker, bringing his wife Wendy and son Danny along. Danny possesses psychic abilities called The Shining, which allow him to see the hotel's dark past. As winter snow traps the family inside, supernatural forces manipulate Jack into madness, threatening his family's survival. Past echoes of the Overlook Hotel. The snowstorm began earlier than expected. Jack Torrance stood at the window of the Overlook Hotel's grand lobby, watching as thick flakes blanketed the mountainside. The world outside disappeared into a white void. Behind him, Wendy unpacked their bags while Danny explored the cavernous halls. "Jack," Wendy called softly, "are you sure about this? It feels so empty here." Jack turned with a forced smile. "That's the point, Wendy. Peace and quiet to write my play." But even as he spoke, he felt a creeping unease, a sensation that they were not alone. Day 1. Whispers in the halls. Danny wandered through the endless corridors of the Overlook, his small footsteps echoing off the polished floors. He paused in front of room 237. The door seemed to hum faintly, as if alive. A voice, soft and melodic, whispered his name. "Danny, come inside." He backed away and ran to find his parents. At dinner that evening, Danny hesitated before speaking. "There's something wrong with this place," he said quietly. Jack laughed nervously. "It's just your imagination, buddy." But Wendy frowned. "Maybe we should keep an eye on him," she whispered later that night. Day 5. The visions begin. As Jack typed furiously in the Colorado lounge, Danny sat on the floor nearby with his toy cars. Suddenly, he froze. His eyes rolled back as he whispered in a voice not his own. "Red drum, red drum." Wendy rushed to him, shaking him awake. "Danny, what happened?" "I saw them," he stammered. "The twins! They were standing in the hallway, covered in blood." Wendy held him close, her heart pounding. But when she looked up at Jack for reassurance, she saw only annoyance on his face. "Stop coddling him," Jack snapped. "He's fine." Day 10. The hotel takes hold. Jack's writing had taken a strange turn. Wendy found pages filled with repeated lines. "All work and no play makes Jack a dull boy." "Jack," she asked cautiously as he stared blankly at his typewriter. He didn't respond. That night, Wendy awoke to find Jack missing from their bed. She searched the hotel and found him in the Gold Room bar, talking animatedly to an empty stool. "What are you doing?" she demanded. "Having a drink with Lloyd," Jack replied with a grin. "There's no one here," Wendy cried. Jack's smile faded into a scowl. "You're always nagging me. Maybe you're the problem." Day 15, Room 237. Unable to resist its pull any longer, Danny crept into room 237 while his parents argued downstairs. Inside was suffocatingly cold. A woman sat in a clawfoot tub filled with dark water. "Come closer," she whispered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Danny screamed and fled as her face twisted into something monstrous, rotting flesh and empty eye sockets. When Wendy found him trembling under his bed, he could only sob. "The woman, she tried to grab me." Wendy confronted Jack about leaving Danny unsupervised, but Jack exploded with rage, accusing her of undermining him at every turn. Day 20. Madness unleashed. The snowstorm raged outside, cutting off all contact with the outside world. Jack smashed the radio and sabotaged their snowcat, their only means of escape. Wendy discovered his manuscript, a single sentence repeated endlessly, and realized her husband was no longer himself. "We need to leave," she told Danny urgently. But it was too late. Jack appeared in the doorway holding an axe, his eyes wild with fury. "You're not going anywhere." Wendy grabbed Danny and locked themselves in a bathroom as Jack began hacking at the door with manic strength. "Here's Johnny," he roared as he broke through. The final stand. Danny escaped through a small window into the snow-covered hedge, maze outside, while Wendy fought off Jack with a kitchen knife. Bleeding but determined, she followed her son's footprints into the maze. Jack pursued them relentlessly, but became disoriented by Danny's clever backtracking. His shouts grew weaker as frostbite set in. Wendy found Danny shivering near an exit and dragged him back to safety inside Haloran's snowcat. The chef had returned after sensing their distress through the shining. Together they fled down the mountain road as dawn broke over the Rockies. Behind them, silence fell over the Overlook Hotel once more, but its malevolent presence remained waiting for its next victims. That's the end, guys. Don't forget to subscribe to Horror Vault to keep listening to our new and unique true horror stories. I will see you in the next video.